Hi everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Darius Fitzner. I'm the Northern Territory Division President of the National Tertiary Education Union, your union. As you're probably aware, we recently started a new round of enterprise bargaining with CDU. And I thought it appropriate to start this series of short videos to keep you updated, through which I intend to keep you broadly informed on how the negotiations are progressing and on the key issues we're dealing with. To date, we've had 4 meetings with the university representatives. The first 3 basically focused on protocols and administration of the negotiation process, and the 4th and most recent meeting, held on Tuesday the 7th of September, was the first meeting during which we started really dealing with issues of the Union Enterprise Agreement. The representatives around the table were from the National Tertiary Education Union, the Australian Education Union, the United Workers Union, and the Australian Metal Workers Union, and of course CDU. Aside from some ongoing housekeeping, this meeting, in my opinion, was productive with a number of constructive developments realised on key issues, along with significant progress on some important issues. You should all be aware that although there has been progress on the matters that I'll outline in a second, the concept of in-principle agreement is one that you'll hear me referring to regularly. Regarding the negotiation of a union enterprise agreement, when parties come to an in-principle agreement, they're agreeing to the principle of an issue or clause, not the written detail of the contract itself. These in-principle agreements are basically stepping stones to a final contract that allow parties to come to an agreement on the overarching principles before working on the details of the contract itself. In-principle agreements are normally subject to agreement on the complete and final detail of the contract, that is, the EA itself. So in summary, the issues discussed fell into the 3 categories of new inclusions, modifications to current clauses, and removal of existing clauses. The new inclusions discussed were the inclusion of a gender transition leave clause and the inclusion of new detail into the Union Enterprise Agreement that would ensure staff can choose to completely disconnect and turn off their engagement with CDU out of the normal span of hours and during holidays. The modifications discussed were a refinement of Clause 23 that speaks to superannuation and a modification to Clause 44 that speaks to compassionate leave. And the removals discussed were the removal of Clauses 85.11 and 85.12 that speak to academic progress, or vet academic progress I should say, through Level A. The removal of Clause 67.1 that speaks to the discretion of the university to offer voluntary early retirement schemes, or VERS, that is consistent with ATO guidelines. The removal of Clause 70 that speaks to criminal history and working with children checks. And the removal of Clause 35.3 that speaks to an on-call allowance for ITMS staff. So now I'll quickly summarise the discussions of these issues and resultant outcomes as I understand them. Regarding the removal of Clause 35.3 that speaks to an on-call allowance for ITMS staff, we are committed to seriously consider this proposal. However, our considerations will be subject to feedback and consultation with the members in ITMS. In this way, we ensure that the removal of a clause, although it may seem to be supernumerary and somewhat useless, just to ensure that the conditions of those people in that area aren't impacted negatively. Regarding the removal of Clause 70 that speaks to criminal history and working with children checks, this saw significant concern from the unions, which the university bargaining team acknowledged, and as such the parties have agreed to consider these matters further in later sessions. Regarding the removal of Clause 67, that speaks to the government's early retirement scheme, or VERS. In the NTU's opinion, this clause does not confer protection or rights to CDU employees. And because it is at the university's discretion, we have agreed in principle to allow it to be removed. Regarding the removal of clauses 85.11 and 85.12 that speak to vet academic progression through Level A, the NTU has for some time now been agitating to remove the progression barriers through Level A for vet academics. These barriers made little sense and occurred at steps 5 and 6 under clause 85.11 and between steps 8 and 9 under clause 85.12. The discussions were detailed, constructive and positive, with an in-principle agreement being reached to remove clauses 85.11 and 85.12 and the associated clause 85.13, which speaks to progression criteria and the administration of the barriers. Of course, the NTU sees this as a significant improvement to the working conditions of employees who are vet level A academics. Regarding the modifications of clause 44 that speak to compassionate leave, it was proposed to increase the entitlement from 3 days of paid compassionate leave for each permissible occasion to 6 days of paid compassionate leave for each permissible occasion. Of course, the NTU welcomes this enhancement and has reached an in-principle agreement. Regarding the refinement of clause 23 that speaks to superannuation, the NTU is seeking to have UniSuper stated as the preferred superannuation provider for university staff as far as it is allowed by law. This discussion was relatively short, ending with the university stating that they are happy to consider this pending a detailed draft of modifications to the clause to be supplied by the NTU. Regarding the inclusion of detail into the EA, that would ensure staff can choose to disconnect completely and turn off their engagements with CDU outside of normal working hours, on weekends and during holidays. The intention of this proposal is to ensure staff have a clear choice. That is, they have a choice without any personal or professional repercussions whether to engage with CDU outside of normal working hours, on weekends and during holidays, and importantly, do not feel pressured in any way to engage. This is in response to significant feedback from staff across the Northern Territory and indeed across the sector in Australia. The discussions around this proposal focused on how it might be achieved in practical terms and wherein the EA might include such detail. The results of the discussion were, in my opinion, positive, with the university asking the NTU to supply a detailed draft of clause insertions to be considered. Last but not least, the proposal to include a clause supporting staff undergoing gender transition leave into the Union Enterprise Agreement. This is something that the NTU is seeking to introduce across all of the sector in Australia and all sector agreements. Towards this end, both the NTU and CDU have proposed draft clauses. The discussions around the table were, in my opinion, respectful and resulted in principle agreement to include such a clause in the Union Enterprise Agreement, pending, of course, agreement around the detail. And of course, the NTU also sees this as a significant improvement to the rights and protections afforded to CDU employees through the Union Enterprise Agreement. So look, thank you for taking the time to listen. Before you go, I would like to make an acknowledgement and ask for your help. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work the negotiation team has put into preparing for this bargaining round and thank them for the immense amount of work they will be doing in the coming months. Importantly, your union leadership and most of the negotiation team are unpaid union volunteers, and their passion and drive to improve employment conditions at CDU is truly laudable. To these people, my deepest respect and thanks. If you see any of the NT Division Council or negotiation team around the traps, I encourage you to engage them, ask them questions, and importantly, thank them for their hard work, passion, and dedication. And second, the negotiation team's time, knowledge, and capacity is limited. This is your agreement. And we can't possibly know everything about CDU and the impacts of the different aspects of the EA across all aspects of CDU. As such, we'll need to ask you for help with the negotiations in the coming months. This may be for a number of reasons, such as to complete a survey, to organise meetings in your area to discuss issues and feedback to the NTEU, or to advise on how draft clauses might best address an issue. Or we might even ask you to tell your story in one of the negotiation sessions. So, if you are invited to complete a survey, attend feedback or planning sessions, or give your advice, or even attend a negotiation session, I encourage you to accept the invitation and engage positively and enthusiastically. Because I assure you the experience will be positive and your efforts will help improve our Union Enterprise Agreement. Finally, if you'd like to volunteer to help out, or you have any questions regarding the negotiations or our log of claims, please do not hesitate to contact myself or Dr. Rajiv Sharma. Have a great day and see you in the next video.